On March 1st, 2027, the blinking box sitting in the corner of your living room is it's legally going to become a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
Right, because the federal government is about to make it totally illegal to fully secure your own home network. And you are probably sitting at home right now or, maybe working in an office, totally relying on Wi-Fi to listen to this.
Oh, absolutely. It's the invisible oxygen of our digital lives. We expect it to work.
Exactly. We never really think about that physical piece of plastic beaming the signal, but you are completely unaware that the literal gateway to your entire digital existence is about to be drastically impacted by, like, a sweeping new federal policy.
It's the classic infrastructure problem, really. I mean, the physical hardware running our lives is entirely invisible to the average person until it stops working.
Right.
Or, in the case of what we are unpacking today, until the regulatory rules governing it completely change the technological landscape overnight.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core tension here is just massive. Our mission for this deep dive is to tear into a highly detailed, incredibly relevant breakdown recently posted by the tech creator Jay's Two Cents.
Yeah, he did a really great job of it.
He did. He did this massive exploration into the impending U.S. ban on foreign-made routers. And we need to cut through, well, a mountain of noise, panic, and misinformation floating around out there.
There's a lot of panic.
So much panic. We are going to figure out exactly what this means for national security, how it disrupts the life cycle of the technology we buy, and crucially, what this is going to do to your wallet. I mean, we are talking about the federal government stepping in and effectively banning the importation of the foundational hardware of the internet.
To set the baseline here, and this is an incredibly important piece of context that Jay's Two Cents emphasizes right at the top of his video, we have to look at the timeline.
Right, the timeline is key.
Exactly. Because this is not some sudden knee-jerk reaction from one specific political faction trying to score points. The video lays out very clearly that this initiative bridges multiple administrations.
Yeah, it's not a new thing.
No, not at all. It began under the previous administration and has been actively continued, expanded, and enforced right into the current one. So, to be absolutely clear to you listening, there are no political sides being taken in this analysis. We are simply reporting the source's observation that there is a massive bipartisan ongoing governmental momentum driving this policy. And its stated focus is entirely on cybersecurity.
Right. It doesn't matter who drafted the first memo. The point is the hammer is dropping right now, today. So let's look at the why. Like, why is the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, actually doing this?
Well, the stated threat is digital espionage and cyber warfare.
Yeah, and Jay pulled a direct quote from the FCC, which states that allowing foreign-produced routers to dominate the U.S. market creates unacceptable economic, national security, and cybersecurity risks. But I want to push on that for a second.
Sure.
Unacceptable risks is a very heavy, very bureaucratic phrase. What are we actually talking about physically happening inside these devices?
Well, if we break down the rationale, it moves from, bureaucratic jargon to a very real threat assessment perspective. We're living in an era where digital war and cyber sabotage aren't just sci-fi concepts anymore. They are daily occurrences.
They really are.
Yeah. And the specific fear outlined in the source is that foreign-made routers could be imported with backdoor exposures built right into their code, or they could carry potentially harmful firmware designed to secretly collect your information, compile it, and beam it off-site.
The phrase Jay used was that these routers are becoming buckets of information. But let's ground this. A lot of people listening are probably thinking, look, I am a very boring person.
Right, the classic defense.
Exactly. I'm checking my email, I'm streaming a baking show, I'm buying cat food on Amazon. I am simply not worth hacking.
That is the most common and, frankly, the most dangerous misconception in cybersecurity.
Oh, really?
Oh, definitely. You might think you aren't worth hacking, but a router is not just a box providing you with Netflix. Technically speaking, a router is the central traffic cop for every single packet of data entering and leaving a physical space.
Okay, so it sees everything.
Everything. When you type in a website, your router handles the DNS request. That's the address book lookup of the internet. It knows exactly what servers you are talking to, when, and for how long. It manages the local IP addresses of every smart TV, every phone, every laptop, and every security camera in your house.
So it's not a matter of a foreign government wanting to read my cat food receipt.
No, not at all.
It's about access. I'm trying to picture this. It's almost like bad actors are trying to compromise the locks on a million different front doors, just in case one of those doors happens to belong to a bank employee who brought their work laptop home on a Tuesday.
That is exactly the mechanism at play.
Huh.
The bad actors aren't looking for your personal data per se. They are hunting for entry points and network leverage. They want a backdoor access point to a much larger, much more critical network.
Ah, like a stepping stone.
Exactly. Let's say an employee logs into a secure hospital database or a municipal water treatment facility from a home network. If that home network is using a compromised router, that router is the vulnerable link in the chain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it can silently capture authentication tokens, or worse, act as a bridge for malware to jump from the home network into the secured corporate network through a VPN tunnel. If the gateway itself is inherently compromised by foreign firmware, every single device sitting behind it is at risk.
Okay, when you explain the mechanics of how a router handles the traffic, the government's fear of foreign hardware suddenly makes total sense. If someone controls the traffic cop, they control the whole intersection.
Right.
But that brings up a massive logistical nightmare. If the government wants to ban foreign routers to secure the intersections, what exactly is the legal definition of a foreign router?
Well, according to the source material, the definition is incredibly broad.
How broad?
A foreign router is defined as any router or gateway for your internet or internet service provider that is manufactured outside of the United States.
Which, as Jay emphatically points out, is currently all of them.
Yeah.
Every single one. 100% of the consumer-grade routers you can buy today are made overseas.
What's fascinating here is how this legislation exposes a massive illusion in the modern consumer tech space. You might walk into a big box electronics store and see a brand you immediately recognize as a deeply, American company.
Like Netgear.
Exactly. Jay uses Netgear as the prime example. Netgear is an American company headquartered in San Jose, California. But the source explicitly notes that Netgear has absolutely no existing American-made routers. Zero.
He also mentions incredibly popular brands like Asus and TP-Link, so it doesn't matter if the company's corporate headquarters is sitting in a sunny office park in Silicon Valley.
Not one bit.
The band doesn't care whose shiny logo is stamped on the plastic casing. It only cares about where the silicon was soldered onto the motherboard and where the product was physically boxed and imported from. And right now, that means every single consumer-grade router on the market is classified as a foreign threat.
And this requires understanding how global supply chains actually function. Companies like Netgear or Asus design the hardware, and they write the software interfaces in California or Taiwan. But the physical manufacturing is almost entirely outsourced to what are called ODMs.
Original design manufacturers.
Right, original design manufacturers located predominantly in mainland China or other parts of Southeast Asia. That is where the actual firmware is flashed onto the memory chips. That is the exact point in the supply chain where a bad actor could theoretically inject a backdoor before the device ever gets put on a cargo ship to Los Angeles.
So the government is looking at that specific factory floor in Shenzhen and saying, we don't trust what's happening in that room.
Pretty much.
But is there literally no one making these things domestically? Jay must have found some exception.
Well, the only exceptions the source could identify were strictly in the enterprise-level equipment space. He mentioned a brand called Adren, which does offer American-made routers. But we are talking about massive enterprise solutions used by telecom companies and huge corporations.
So not something I can just pick up at the mall.
No, you cannot walk into a Best Buy, a Walmart, an Amazon storefront, or a Micro Center and buy an Adren router for your living room. They simply do not exist for the average consumer market. The scale required to manufacture complex consumer electronics at a price point people are willing to pay, say, under $300, currently relies entirely on overseas manufacturing.
Hold on. Let's play this out to its logical conclusion.
Okay.
Wait, so if everything on the shelf right now is imported and the FCC is dropping a ban on the importation of foreign routers, does that mean the shelves are just going to go empty? Are we looking at a situation where if my Wi-Fi dies tomorrow, I have to go back to reading paperbacks because I literally cannot buy a replacement?
No. That is the immediate visceral panic that this kind of sweeping regulatory announcement induces. But the source clarifies that there is an immediate exemption built into the policy that prevents the electronics aisles from going bare overnight.
So what does this all mean for the listener who is sitting next to a foreign-made Wi-Fi setup right now, or who has a Best Buy trip planned for this weekend?
It means the immediate consumer impact, at least for today, is essentially zero.
Oh, phew. Okay.
Yeah. The source details that all existing models currently on the market today, including the continued manufacturing of those specific existing models, are grandfathered in. If you go to the store today, everything you see is legally safe to purchase. Furthermore, all routers that are currently owned and operating in American homes can continue to be owned and operated.
Right. Jay actually quoted the FCC's specific legal phrasing on this. Consumers can continue to use any router they have already lawfully purchased or acquired. Which is just, I mean, such a funny, deeply bureaucratic way of phrasing it.
It really is.
He actually went on a tangent about that phrase, lawfully purchased, joking about whether we were going to see the rise of a black market for consumer Wi-Fi routers.
Right, yeah, he drew a comparison to another tech creator, Steve, who had recently covered the phenomenon of a GPU black market.
Oh, right. The graphics cards.
Exactly. But Jay astutely pointed out the directional difference there. The GPU black market involves highly advanced graphics cards being smuggled out of the U.S. and into China to bypass export restrictions on AI technology. This router situation is the exact reverse. It's about hardware coming from outside the U.S. into the country.
But wait, I have to push back on the logic of this grandfather clause.
Go for it.
If the government genuinely believes my imported TP-Link or Asus router is an unacceptable national security risk, why on earth are they legally blessing my right to keep using it? That makes zero logical sense. If it's a threat, it's a threat.
Well, it's a matter of pragmatic triage. Consider the alternative. What happens if the government simply demands everyone hand in their routers? Or, what if they mandated ISPs to block all traffic from foreign MSC addresses overnight?
I guess the internet would just stop.
The resulting societal and economic collapse would be catastrophic. Every home office, small business, point-of-sale system, and smart grid device would instantly go dark. Our entire infrastructure would grind to a halt. The grandfather clause isn't an admission that the hardware is safe. It is a necessary buffer to prevent total societal disruption.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the lesser of two evils.
Right. Retailers can continue to sell, import, and market router models that have already been approved through the FCC's existing equipment authorization process indefinitely. But there's a massive condition attached to that word, indefinitely.
And that condition is that the manufacturers cannot make any hardware changes, which sounds fine on paper until you realize how fast technology moves. Your current router is safe today, sure. The shelves aren't empty tomorrow. But the world of consumer networking does not sit still.
No, it evolves incredibly fast.
And this is where the policy transitions from a theoretical supply chain issue to a massive bureaucratic bottleneck that is about to freeze technological innovation in its tracks.
Exactly. The long-term impact of this ban fundamentally alters how technology will reach the public. The source explains that routers typically see entirely new model updates every couple of years. And this isn't just companies trying to sell you a new piece of plastic with sharper antennas for aesthetic reasons. The underlying technology fundamentally changes.
Right. We are talking about massive leaps in capability. We went from Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6, which revolutionized how many devices could talk to the router at the exact same millisecond.
It was a huge jump.
And now we are moving into Wi-Fi 7, dealing with wider frequency bands, faster speeds, and entirely new protocol standards. Plus, ISPs are executing massive rollouts of fiber optics directly to homes. The hardware inside the router has to physically evolve to process those massive data pipelines.
But moving forward, under this new policy, getting a new model of a foreign-manufactured router into the U.S. market is going to be an administrative nightmare.
How so?
Historically, a company just had to pass basic FCC signal checks, just ensuring the router didn't emit radiation that interfered with radio towers or airplane communications. But the source details a radical shift. Any manufacturer wanting to sell a new model of a foreign router must now first apply for conditional approval from the Department of Homeland Security.
The DHS?
Yes, the DHS. And only if they manage to secure permission from them can they then proceed to the standard FCC equipment authorization.
And Jay makes a very pointed, very critical observation here. He states flat out that the Department of Homeland Security is simply not an entity designed to handle a consumer electronics workload. They are not a tech certification lab.
Right. He genuinely doubts that the DHS has the infrastructure, the personnel, or the institutional knowledge to understand the highly nuanced, rapidly iterating intricacies of consumer hardware life cycles. We're talking about auditing millions of lines of code, assessing deep supply chain components, sourcing down to individual capacitors, and doing this for dozens of models from multiple companies simultaneously.
That's insane.
Adding a layer of DHS approval on top of FCC approval is going to make the process painstakingly slow. And, crucially, this process is not free. It costs these manufacturing companies massive amounts of money and legal resources to navigate multi-agency approval processes.
And that financial burden is the hinge of the entire problem. I mean, companies like Asus or Netgear exist to make money. If the process to release a new, innovative router suddenly becomes incredibly slow, bogged down by DHS bureaucracy, and massively expensive because of the fees and delays associated with these approvals, what are these companies logically going to do?
The market reaction is almost entirely predictable. Because getting a new model approved is going to be such a massive headache with low return on investment, manufacturers will likely just halt the release of new models entirely.
Wow.
Yeah, the source theorizes that brands will simply artificially elongate the life cycle of their current grandfathered-in models. They will keep churning out and selling the exact same internal hardware for years longer than they normally would, specifically to avoid triggering the DHS conditional approval process required for a new device.
Which means innovation in the consumer networking space could just slow to an absolute crawl in the US. The irony of this is just staggering. Jay actually did a sponsor read right at the beginning of his video, and while it was an ad, it perfectly highlighted this insane contrast.
Oh, about the mouse.
Yes, he was talking about a high-end gaming mouse from a company called Be Quiet, the Dark Perk mouse.
And what were the specifications he highlighted?
He went deep into the weeds. He was hyping up how it has a PixArt Paw 3950 optical sensor up to 32,000 dpi and 8,000 hertz polling rate.
Meaning the mouse reports its position to the computer 8,000 times a second.
Exactly. It has optical Omron switches,
Right.
100% PTFE skates with rounded edges for a more predictable glide across the mice pad, 110 hours of battery life. I mean, it's an engineering marvel. Consumers demand this insane, hyper-fast, microscopic precision and rapid innovation in their peripherals, down to the literal skates on the bottom of a piece of plastic.
Right.
But the actual box routing all that high-speed data, the literal foundation of their network processing those 8,000 clicks a second, is going to be stuck in a bureaucratic time capsule because companies won't want to pay DHS fees.
The juxtaposition is striking. Your peripherals will continue to evolve at lightning speed,
Yeah.
utilizing the newest silicon and sensors globally available, while the gateway that connects them to the broader internet remains completely stagnant. But a stagnant router isn't just a minor annoyance regarding internet speed or ping times. It actually introduces a much more severe problem.
Yeah.
This stagnation leads us to the most dangerous and arguably the most technically illogical part of this entire ban.
Here's where it gets really interesting. And honestly, terrifying for anyone who cares about their data. Let's talk about the March 2027 firmware paradox. Because while the hardware itself is grandfathered in, the software that protects that hardware is on a ticking clock.
Yeah, the source outlines a critical, hard deadline established by the government. On March 1st, 2027, all of that grandfathered hardware that we just discussed, the millions of routers currently sitting on store shelves, and the one actively routing traffic in your home right now, can legally no longer update their firmware.
Wait, really? No updates at all?
None. The government is strictly banning any future firmware updates for these existing foreign models after that specific date.
I want to make sure we are totally clear on what firmware actually is, because it sounds like generic tech jargon. Firmware isn't just an app you download. It's the core operating system permanently programmed into the hardware's memory. It's the brain of the router.
Exactly.
It tells the antenna how to broadcast, it manages the firewall, and most importantly, it contains the security protocols that keep hackers out.
Precisely. And security vulnerabilities are not static. They are discovered constantly. Security researchers and malicious hackers are in a perpetual arms race. When a vulnerability is found, say, a flaw in how the router handles a specific type of encrypted packet, the manufacturer writes a patch to fix that flaw and pushes it out as a firmware update. That is how the digital world stays secure.
Jay was filming this video around April, and he pointed out that this regulation gave everyone roughly an 11-month window, maybe a year, from the time the news started breaking until that March 2027 cutoff. He speculated on why the government would pick a date just a year out. Was it designed to give these router companies a grace period to magically build new manufacturing plants inside the United States?
And he immediately concludes that scenario is highly unlikely and, frankly, logistically impossible. You cannot spin up a massive high-tech silicon fabrication and consumer manufacturing infrastructure in the United States within 11 months.
Right, that takes a decade.
It takes years and billions of dollars just to plan a facility, let alone build it, staff it, and replace the entire global supply chain of consumer routers. The date seems somewhat arbitrary to him, but the implications of that date are profound and deeply contradictory to the stated goals of the ban.
Right. This is the paradox. I am struggling to wrap my head around the logic here. The entire stated reason for the FCC doing this, that quote we broke down earlier, is to prevent unacceptable national security and cybersecurity risks.
Right.
The government is terrified of vulnerable routers being used for digital espionage, but by banning firmware updates on tens of millions of existing active devices, they are artificially creating a hard date where every single grandfathered router in the country can no longer be patched against new threats.
This raises an important question. Does the regulatory body actually understand the technological realities of firmware patching, or are they operating purely on a geopolitical mandate to block foreign code, regardless of the localized consequences?
I mean, it really makes you wonder.
As the source points out, if you are the kind of person who buys a router, plugs it in, and never logs in to update it, you could be fully exposed to a botnet right now without knowing it. But at least the theoretical possibility of attach exists. Come March 2027, if a massive zero-day exploit is discovered in a wildly popular grandfathered router model, the manufacturer is legally barred from sending out a patch to fix it.
Jay's bewilderment at this is entirely justified. He points out that you are basically broadcasting a message to every bad actor on the planet saying, hey, you have 11 months to figure out a workaround or find a deep-level vulnerability in these popular routers, and once you do, the door is permanently propped open because it is literally against U.S. law for the manufacturer to close it.
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought.
Jay literally looked at the camera and said, if you're the kind of person that doesn't update your firmware anyway, enjoy your Trojan. It feels like the policy is effectively mandating future vulnerabilities.
It is a stunning contradiction. Think about how malware like the Mirai botnet operated. It scoured the internet for vulnerable, unpatched routers and security cameras, hijacked them, and used them as a massive coordinated swarm to launch crippling DDoS attacks.
Oh, I remember that. It took down half the internet.
Exactly. If the primary goal of the FCC and DHS is cybersecurity, freezing the firmware of millions of active devices is entirely counterintuitive. It transforms a dynamic, defensible home network into a static, sitting target.
It's like discovering your house has a faulty lock and the government passing a law that says you are legally forbidden from calling a locksmith to fix it. But as if the catastrophic security implications weren't concerning enough, Jay dives into how this regulatory environment is inevitably going to be exploited by corporations. And this leads to a direct, painful hit on your wallet.
Yes. This is where the policy moves from being a frustrating, high-level technological issue to an infuriating financial reality. The source outlines what we can call the ISP loophole, and what he deeply fears is the return of a deeply exploitative business model from the early days of the internet.
Let's talk about how your internet service provider is going to use this to squeeze you. To understand this loophole, we need to understand the hardware. Jay points out that ISPs, your local cable or fiber company, are massive buyers of what are called combo units.
For clarity, a combo unit is a single piece of hardware that contains both a modem and a router. The modem's job is to take the analog or light signal coming from the cable outside your house and demodulate it into a digital signal your devices can understand.
Okay.
The router's job, as we discussed, is to take that digital signal and securely direct the traffic wirelessly to all your individual devices. ISPs love giving you one single box that does both because it's easier for them to install and troubleshoot.
Makes sense. One box is easier than two. But under this new ban, those combo units are classified as routers because they perform routing functions. Therefore, if they are foreign-made, which they all are, they are banned from future importation without that crazy DHS approval.
Yep.
However, pure standalone modems devices that strictly receive the signal and do not route local traffic wirelessly are not affected by this ban.
And this distinction is where the exploitation begins. The source talks about his own setup. Jay and his friend Phil are what you would call extreme power users. He describes how they have these massive 5 gigabit and 2.5 gigabit internal networks running through multiple enterprise-grade switches in their homes.
Just for gaming.
Yeah, specifically optimized for insanely fast Steam game downloads, while the rest of the household just uses a standard gigabit connection for scrolling social media.
Because they are tech-savvy power users, they already hate ISP combo units. When the ISP installs one, Jay and Phil immediately log into the box, disable the built-in Wi-Fi routing functions, and put it in bridge mode. They just want the raw modem signal so they can manage the routing themselves with their high-end gear.
For tech-savvy individuals, a government regulation that forces ISPs to return to providing standalone modems would actually be welcomed. But the source recognizes the reality of the broader market. Average consumers rely heavily on those simple, all-in-one combo units provided by their ISP.
Yeah, nobody wants a complicated setup.
The average person does not want to buy a standalone modem, run Ethernet cables to a separate switch, and configure a standalone wireless access point. They just want to plug one box into the wall and have Wi-Fi.
And this is where Jay provides some really crucial historical context that is going to make older listeners shudder. He talks about the late 90s and early 2000s, back in the days of early DSL and Time Warner cable broadband.
Oh, the dark ages.
Truly. Back then, ISPs would provide you with a basic standalone modem. But their business model involved charging you extra fees if you dared to connect multiple computers to it, or if you had the audacity to use an early commercially available router to share the connection.
It was a highly restrictive model.
Yeah.
ISPs would track the MSI addresses of your devices, and you actually had to declare how many devices you were going to connect so they could upcharge you for each one. Tech enthusiasts had to learn how to clone NDC addresses on their personal routers just to hide their home networks from their ISPs to avoid these extra fees.
It was a nightmare. And Jay's specific, highly plausible prediction is that this new router ban gives ISPs the absolute perfect government-mandated excuse to resurrect that exact manipulative toll bridge model.
His theory is grounded in how corporate monopolies react to regulation. The ISPs are going to go to their customers and say, oh no, we are so sorry, but we can't give you the convenient Wi-Fi combo units anymore because of the new government national security regulations.
Right, they blame the government.
Exactly. They will pivot back to providing just a basic standalone modem that only outputs a single wired connection.
But then here's the trap. The ISP will source massive quantities of incredibly cheap bare-bones routers. We are talking terrible $40 plastic units with awful range. And because the ISP is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, they will use their massive legal and financial resources to push those specific cheap routers through the expensive, grueling DHS and FCC approval process that the smaller consumer brands can't afford.
Exactly. The ISPs have the capital to navigate the bureaucracy. Once the ISP has their government-approved low-quality router, they will turn back to the consumer and say, if you want Wi-Fi in your house, you can't buy an Asus or a Netgear anymore because they aren't approved. But you can use our government-approved gateway.
Unbelievable.
And then they will rent that $40 piece of plastic back to the consumer for an exorbitant monthly fee, let's say $50 a month, forever.
I am picturing this like buying the plumbing for your house. You pay for the pipes and the water connection, but the water company shows up and says, sorry, due to new national security regulations regarding water safety, you have to rent our specific government-approved faucets for $50 a month. If you don't, you just get a fire hose spraying directly into your living room.
That's a great analogy.
It gives historically unpopular ISPs the absolute perfect scapegoat to return to predatory pricing. They can just point the finger at Washington and say, hey, don't get mad at us, we're just following the laws keeping you safe, while they are raking in massive, perpetual monthly rental fees on garbage hardware.
It perfectly highlights the vast gap between the tech-savvy users who can navigate standalone modems and build their own networks, and the average users who will essentially be forced into a subscription-based gateway just to have Wi-Fi in their living room.
Because they don't know any better.
Right. The ISPs can incur the massive upfront cost of regulatory compliance because they mathematically know they can pass an inflated, continuous cost down to the consumer under the unassailable guise of national security compliance.
So we started this deep dive looking at a high-level geopolitical discussion about digital espionage, foreign supply chains, and the FCC. And we have watched how that massive regulatory machine trickles all the way down to you, the listener. It ends with you potentially having a $50 a month surcharge quietly added to your internet bill to rent a router that hasn't seen a hardware innovation in 3 years, and which legally cannot receive a security patch after March 2027.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a classic textbook example of sweeping legislation colliding violently with the complex realities of global supply chains, technological life cycles, and everyday consumer habits. The intention securing the nation's digital infrastructure against legitimate state-sponsored threats is straightforward and understandable.
Sure, nobody wants to get hacked. Exactly. The execution, however, creates a cascading series of unintended consequences that stifle innovation, mandate future security vulnerabilities, and shift economic burdens directly onto the household level. Jay asked his audience a really poignant question at the end of his video. He asked if this felt like a necessary security move or if it just felt like fear-mongering. And I want to leave you with a thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Let's hear it.
If a sweeping, unprecedented regulation designed to protect our data ultimately forces us to use outdated, legally unpatchable hardware while simultaneously forcing us to pay higher monthly fees to ISP monopolies, does the cure eventually become worse than the disease? If the goal is to make us safer, but the result is millions of frozen, vulnerable networks across the country, who actually wins? Something to think about the next time you are sitting at home, relying on that invisible oxygen, and your Wi-Fi suddenly drops. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the world around you, and we will catch you on the next one.